We're diving deep into network security today, specifically Chapter 13 of the CCNA Certification Study Guide. We'll be looking at the major threats, defenses, and, how to actually put those basic protections in place.
Sounds good.
So let's start with, well, the reason we need network security in the first place, the attackers.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty insightful,
It is. We always hear about hackers, right? Like it's just this one big group.
right?
But the chapter, it breaks it down into 4 types: unstructured, structured, external, and internal. And each one has like a different level of, sophistication and intent.
So it's kind of like the difference between someone who just stumbles upon a vulnerability versus someone who's actively, hunting for them.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. One thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis on internal threats.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thought, but oftentimes the biggest security risk can come from within an organization.
Right.
A disgruntled employee, someone with a grudge. The chapter even mentions that even if it's something, seemingly harmless, just like an employee who knows their way around the network, that can escalate into something much more serious.
And then there's the classic example of sending, sensitive information over an unsecured network.
Oh, yeah. The book actually uses the example of like a username and password being sent in clear text, which seems obvious, right?
Yeah.
But it just highlights how easily data can be, exposed without the right security measures in place. Like if you're on public Wi-Fi, using a VPN becomes less about, anonymity and more about just basic data protection.
Yeah, it really makes you realize that network security, it's not just about those big, data breaches you hear about in the news.
Right.
It's about protecting those, those small, everyday interactions.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding the attacker's playbook is really important. And Chapter 13 gets to 3 main types of attacks: reconnaissance, access attacks, and then, denial of service, or DOS.
Okay. Reconnaissance. That sounds like something straight out of a spy movie.
It totally is. It's basically the information gathering phase.
Yeah.
So think of it as attackers kind of mapping out your network, trying to identify any weak points and then planning their attack.
Okay, so they might be, using tools to scan your systems or even trying to, I don't know, trick employees into revealing sensitive info.
Exactly. Social engineering, they call it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's all about being really aware of what information you're putting out there, even unintentionally.
Exactly, yeah. Because once the attacker has enough information, then they can actually launch that access attack.
Okay.
And that's where they're actively trying to exploit the vulnerabilities, trying to gain access to the network. It could be, brute forcing passwords, exploiting software flaws, or even tricking someone into clicking a malicious link.
Yep. Okay, so that's how they get in. But what about denial of service attacks?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty disruptive.
It is. A DOS attack, it's basically like someone, slamming their car into the front doors of a business. It's disruptive, and it can be incredibly costly.
Yeah. The book mentions the ping of death, which sounds, I don't know, almost cartoonishly evil.
It does, doesn't it?
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's a classic example of a DOS attack. Imagine someone weaponizing those little ping signals,
Huh.
the ones that computers use to check for other devices on a network.
Okay.
Now imagine them sending a massive flood of these oversized, malformed pings to a server.
So it's like overloading the server with bad requests until it just can't function anymore?
It's more about exploiting a limitation in how servers, process those pings.
Okay.
It's kind of like sending an email that's so large it just completely crashes the recipient's inbox.
Right, right.
But in this case, it can take down a whole website or even an entire network. And the chapter, it really emphasizes how damaging these attacks can be to businesses.
Oh, I bet.
I mean, imagine losing access to your online store, right?
Yeah.
Or your customer database for hours. It's not just an inconvenience,
Right.
That's lost revenue. That's a potential PR nightmare.
Yeah, that's some scary stuff. So time to, I guess, bring in the cavalry, right?
Right.
The chapter then moves into defense strategies. And it seems like a multi-layered approach is super important.
It is. It is. The book uses this analogy of, a castle with multiple layers of defense to protect that inner keep. And it kind of breaks it down into 3 main categories: access control, network hardening, and then authentication methods.
So access control would be that first line of defense, right? Like the castle walls, so to speak.
Exactly. And that starts with just basic physical security, who actually has access to your servers,
Oh,
to your
yeah.
network equipment.
Yeah.
I always think about that story about the disgruntled employee who managed to, like, take down a company's entire network
Oh, no.
just by, like, unplugging a cable.
Wow. Yeah, so physical security it's no joke.
No joke at all.
But, okay, so say we've got the server room on lockdown, right?
Right.
What about those, like, digital drawbridges and the moats?
Right. That's where that network hardening comes in. Firewalls, those are a classic example. They basically act as a barrier between your network and, the big bad world out there.
Right.
Filtering all that traffic based on, predefined rules.
So it's like having that, like, security guard at the gate,
Well, actually,
checking IDs, making sure only authorized personnel get through.
exactly. That's a great way to put it.
And then what about those other techniques that are mentioned in the chapter, like DHCP snooping
Right.
and DAI?
So these are, they're more specialized defenses. So DHCP snooping, that's there to prevent, rogue devices from basically impersonating legitimate ones.
Oh, wow.
And then, like, hijacking your network.
So they're like, what, putting on a fake mustache and trying to sneak in?
Exactly. Think of it as, like, stopping someone from sneaking into your castle disguised as a knight.
Okay.
They look like they belong, but they don't.
Right. Clever. So, okay, we've got the walls, we've got the gatekeepers. What about, like, the inner sanctum?
Right.
The really valuable stuff.
Yeah.
That's where authentication comes in, right?
Exactly. Authentication, it's all about verifying identity.
Okay.
It's the difference between someone just picking the lock on your front door
Right.
versus them actually having the key to get in. The chapter goes into a bunch of different methods, but
Okay.
there are two that really stand out. PKI
Yeah.
and Kerberos.
Those sound a little intimidating.
So let's start with PKI, which stands for Public Key Infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's really the backbone of, secure communication online these days.
Okay.
So think of it like this. Imagine two people, they want to send secret messages to each other,
Right.
but they can't, like, meet up beforehand to exchange keys.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. PKI solves this by using a pair of keys. So you've got a public key, which anyone can use to encrypt messages for you.
Okay.
And then you've got your private key, which only you have, to decrypt those messages.
So it's like sending, like, locked box, basically.
Exactly.
Anyone can put a message in,
Yeah.
but only the recipient, the person with the key, can actually open it.
Exactly. And that's how we, ensure secure online transactions these days.
Wow.
It's how we verify digital signatures, even encrypt emails. It's like the foundation of trust in the digital world.
That's amazing. Okay, what about Kerberos? The chapter mentioned that it's used for, like, internal networks, right?
Right. Think of Kerberos like it's the security system for, like, a large organization.
Okay.
Or like a university campus, right?
Okay.
It's designed to prevent unauthorized access to shared resources.
Okay.
So instead of everyone having a key to every single room, Kerberos grants access based on, your role and your permissions.
Okay.
It's like having like a digital key card, right? That
Right.
only unlocks certain doors you're authorized to use.
So it's like having, like, a digital security guard, right?
Yeah.
Making sure only the right people can get to the right info.
Exactly. And the best part is, like, all of that, it just happens in the background. Yeah. So users, they don't have to, deal with these complex login procedures every time they just want to, like, access a file or open an application.
That's always good. Speaking of logins, though, this chapter, it really, like, hits hard on the importance of strong passwords.
Yeah.
It's something you hear all the time,
Right.
But the book really, like, drives it home.
It does. And what's interesting is, like, the shift in thinking. It used to be all about these complex combinations, letters, numbers, symbols.
Yeah, right.
But as the chapter points out, it's actually, like, length over complexity when it comes to password strength.
Which makes sense because, I mean, those, like, those random strings of characters, those are impossible to remember.
Exactly, yeah.
The book even mentioned a study where they found that longer passwords, even if they were just, like, common phrases, those were way harder to crack.
Yeah, because it's about making it as difficult as possible for these attackers to, just guess or, like, brute force their way in.
Right.
The book also, it really highlights the importance of, those password policies. Remember that anecdote about the user who wrote their password, like, right on their monitor?
Oh, yeah, a little too much transparency there.
Right.
It shows why those, like, regular password changes, using different passwords for every account, all that, like, why it's so crucial, and using a password manager.
Oh, absolutely. A password manager is key.
So speaking of like practical tips, right?
Yeah.
If someone's listening to this, maybe they're prepping for the CCNA, but they also, just want to be more secure in their everyday life.
Sure.
What are some of the like key takeaways from this chapter that they should like really remember?
Oh, that's a great question. So first off, enable those strong passwords, but on your home router, that's like the most overlooked entry point for a lot of people. Use a password manager, create a unique one, a strong one. Don't stick with that default password.
Seriously, folks, change those defaults. It's like leaving a giant welcome sign out for, cyber criminals.
Exactly. Second, be mindful of public Wi-Fi.
Right.
Without a VPN, you're basically just like broadcasting your online activity to, anyone who might be listening in.
So using a VPN, it's kind of like creating that secure tunnel for your data, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And then lastly, always be wary of any suspicious links or emails,
Oh, yeah.
because phishing attacks, those are getting more sophisticated all the time. Double check that sender's address, triple check that URL of any website that's asking for your personal info.
Right. Don't just click anything.
Exactly.
It all comes back to that old saying, right?
What's that?
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
That's right.
Or in this case, a whole lot of digital headaches.
Exactly. Exactly. A whole lot of trouble.
Well, on that note, we'll leave everyone with a final thought.
Okay.
Chapter 13, it touches on the rise of like biometric authentication.
Right.
Things like, fingerprint scanning, facial recognition, and, it's super convenient and all.
Sure.
But it does make you wonder about that trade-off between like security and privacy.
Right.
It's like, is that a price that we're willing to pay
Yeah.
for more protection?
It's a good question.
It really is.
Yeah.
Something to think about. As we're all like navigating this crazy world of network security. So stay curious out there, stay safe, and until next time, everyone, keep those passwords strong.